Today we'll be visiting three iconic lighthouses along the Outer Cape. Each of these lighthouses has a very rich history, political history, financial history, history of the light service and how they were staffed, tales of bravery and selflessness that took place during the storms that battered the coast, many of these during the 19th and early 20th century. These were very important aids to navigation that really meant the difference between life and death for mariners. Unfortunately, many of them have fallen into disrepair, and some of them have been removed in current times. The advent of technology, GPS, and that sort of thing has really thought to make these beacons not that relevant. But in fact, if you are a mariner and if you've been out in a storm, even with GPS and all the technology, having a light on the horizon to guide you into port is, I'll tell you from personal experience, is definitely a welcome sight. So today we're going to look at these lighthouses. The first of these will be Highland Light in North Truro, and we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. Light Station, also known as Cape Cod Light, is located in Outer Cape Cod within the Cape Cod National Seashore in North Truro. Commissioned by George Washington and established in 1797 as the 20th light station in the United States, the original 45-foot tall wooden tower and keeper's dwelling were built more than 500 feet from the edge of a 125-foot tall clay cliff. A new brick lighthouse was erected near the original tower in 1831. The present 66-foot tall brick light tower, keeper's house, and generator shed replaced the previous structures in 1857. An enclosed walkway connects the tower and the 1 1/2 story L-shaped Queen Anne style keeper's dwelling. History has marked erosion of the steep cliff throughout the years and has brought the present light station closer than 100 feet to the cliff's edge. And this happened early in the 1990s. Using funds raised by the Truro Historical Society combined with state and federal grants, Highland Light Station was successfully moved 450 feet back to safer ground. After the 18-day move, the light was relit on November 3rd, 1996, and is an active aid to navigation. Today, the Keeper's House features a gift shop, a museum exhibits, and a dedicated staff provides tours of the tower. The noted naturalist and author Henry David Thoreau was a big fan of the lighthouse and visited several times during the 1850s. He often commented that the lighthouse was a neat building in apple pie order. A couple of essays that he wrote in the Atlantic Monthly, I'll excerpt here. In 1964, he wrote, "The keeper entertained us handsomely in his solitary little ocean house. He was a man of singular patience and intelligence who, when our query struck him, rang as clear as a bell in response. The lighthouse lamp a few feet distant shone into my chamber and made it as bright as day. So I knew exactly how the Highland Light bore all that night, and it was no damage of being wrecked. Thought as I lay there half awake and half asleep, looking upward through the window at the lights above my head, how many sleepless eyes, far out from the ocean stream, mariners of all nations spinning their yarns through the various watches of the night, were directed towards my couch." This is the second excerpt from an Atlantic Monthly article written by Thoreau. "The Highland Lighthouse, where we were staying, is a substantial-looking building of white brick, painted white, and surmounted by an iron cap. Attached to it is the dwelling of a keeper, 1 story high, also of brick, and built by government. As we were going to spend the night in a lighthouse, we wished to make the most of so novel an experience, and therefore told our host that we would like to accompany him when he went to light up. At rather early candlelight, he lighted a small Japan lamp, allowing it to smoke rather more than we like on ordinary occasions, and told us to follow him. He led the way first through his bedroom, which was placed nearest to the lighthouse, and then through a long, narrow, covered passageway between whitewashed walls like a prison entry, into the lower part of the lighthouse where many great butts of oil were arranged around. Thence we ascended by a winding and open iron stairway with steadily increasing scent of oil and lamp smoke to a trapdoor in an iron floor. Through this into the lantern room. It was a neat building with everything in apple pie order and no danger of anything rusting there for want of oil. The light consisted of 15 argand lamps placed within smooth concave reflectors 21 inches each in diameter and arranged in 2 horizontal circles, one above the other, facing every way excepting directly down the cape. These were surrounded at a distance of 2 or 3 feet by large plate glass windows, which defied the storms, with iron sashes on which rested the iron cap. All the ironwork, except for the floor, was painted white, and thus the lighthouse was completed. We walked slowly around that narrow space as the keeper lighted each lamp in succession, conversing with him at the same moment that many a sailor on the deep witnessed the lighting of the Highland light. His duty was to fill and trim the light in his lamps, and keep bright the reflectors. He filled them every morning and trimmed them commonly once in the course of night. He complained of the quality of oil with which was furnished. This house consumes about 800 gallons in a year, which cost not far from $1 a gallon, but perhaps a few lives would be saved if better oil were provided. Another lighthouse keeper said that the same proportion of winter-strained oil was sent to the southernmost lighthouse in the Union as to the most northern. Formerly, when this lighthouse had windows with small and thin panes, a severe storm would break the glass, and then they would be obliged to put up wooden shutters in haste to save their lights and reflectors. And sometimes in tempest, when the mariners stood most in need of their guidance, they would thus nearly converted the lighthouse into a dark lantern, which emitted only a few feeble rays, and those commonly on the land and lee side. He spoke of the anxiety and sense of responsibility with which he felt in cold and stormy nights in the winter, when he knew that many a poor fellow was depending on him, and his lamps burned dimly, the oil being chilled. Sometimes he was obliged to warm the oil in a kettle in his house at midnight, and fill his lamps over again, for he could not have a fire in the lighthouse. It produced such a sweat on the windows. His successor told me that he could not keep too hot a fire in such a case. All this was because of the poor oil. A government lighting the mariners on its wintry coast with a summer-strained oil to save expense. That were surely a summer-strained mercy. This keeper's successor, who kindly entertained me the next year, stated that one extremely cold night, when this and all neighboring lights were burning summer oil, he had been provident enough to reserve a little winter oil against emergencies. He waked up with anxiety and found that his oil was congealed, and his lights almost extinguished. And when, after many hours' exertion, he had succeeded in replenishing his reservoirs with winter oil at the wick end, and with difficulty had made them burn, he looked out and found the other lights in the neighborhood, which were normally visible to him, had gone out, and he heard afterwards that Palmet River and Billingsgate River lights had also been extinguished. Finally, it was said in 1794 that more vessels were cast away on the east shore of Truro than anywhere in Barnstable County. Notwithstanding that this lighthouse has since been erected. After most every storm, we read of one or more vessels wrecked here, and sometimes more than a dozen wrecks are visible from this point at a time. Inhabitants hear the crash of vessels going to pieces as they sit around their hearths, and they are commonly date from some memorable shipwreck. If the history of this beach could be written from beginning to end, it would be a thrilling page in the history of commerce. Truro settled in the year 1700 as Dangerfield. This is a very appropriate name, as I afterward read on a monument in the graveyard near the Palmet River the following inscription. Sacred to the memory of 57 citizens of Truro were lost in 7 vessels which foundered at sea in the memorable gale of October 3rd, 1841. Nauset Light is the most famous and arguably most photographed lighthouse on Cape Cod. It is located within the Cape Cod National Seashore and is an important part of East Ham's cultural and maritime history. Nauset Light is helping private fleets and uses of small sailing boats that sail near the coast. It's important to note that the lighthouse is no longer under the auspices of the United States Coast Guard. This is true of many lighthouses. They were decommissioned by the Coast Guard because they were considered no longer necessary as an aid to navigation. However, many foundations and private nonprofits have sprung up to continue to caretake these wonderful aids to navigation. Many ships were destroyed at the Nauset Bar at sea, which provoked the inhabitants in 1836 in East Ham to write to Marine Society in Boston to request a lighthouse for Nauset Beach on the Atlantic coast. And this is halfway between Highland Light, which we talked about earlier, and the 2 Chatham lights, which is now only a single light. Congress approved in March of 1837 the construction of the lighthouse to stop the wrecking of ships, as it allocated $10,000 for the new station. The lighthouse is located on Nauset Road from Cable Beach in the National Seashore in East Ham. The Nauset Lighthouse was fitted with lights that crossed 3 times every 10 seconds, as this was homage to the 3 sisters and the second home in 1876 connected. Because of the erosion of the cliffs, the original house was removed, and the only light was commissioned on June 1st, 1911. The new Nauset Light received a 4th order Fresnel lens from the remaining tower of the 3 sisters, and the light lantern was propelled by kerosene. In the 1980s, the strength of waves and violent storms had eaten the nearby cliff and threatened Nauset Lighthouse. Through the efforts of the Nauset Preservation Society, the lighthouse, which was around 80 tons and 336 feet, was safely shifted from the edge by help of the International Fireplace Flare Corporation and expert movers. The movement, which lasted 2 days and began on November 16, 1966, was much easier than the task of moving the Cape Mountain Lighthouse, which was 2 companies had already done earlier this year. Nauset Lighthouse was automated in 1955 by the United States Coast Guard and sold to the porter. In 1981, modern aero beacons replaced the 4th order Fresnel lens. Currently, the National Coast Visitor Center is shown on East Ham and Cape Cod. The lens that was removed is in that visitor center. The house of the keeper was removed from the edge of the cliff and placed near the cast iron tower. The 48-foot tower was painted white until the 1940s, when the upper half was painted red to increase visibility during daytime. In 1998, Mary Dobbins-Beck agreed to give 1,875 dwelling houses of the keeper to the National Park Service. but she reserved the right to use the house for 25 years. In October of the same year, the dwelling house of the keeper, which was only 7 feet from the edge of the cliff, was also moved across the street and met the tower, where the same orientation and relative position were kept in front of the lighthouse. Although Donovan Speck did not live long to enjoy the new place, as she died in March of 2001. The property of the lighthouse went to the Cape Cod National Seashore. In May 2004, a collaborative agreement was signed between the National Park Service and the Nauset Conservation Society. According to the agreement, the National Park Service will keep the lighthouse going as an aid to navigation and is responsible for maintaining the tower and the oil house. The Nauset Lighthouse is serving as an active light to navigators and mariners. This has helped reduce the number of accidents involving ships and sailors. The lighthouse was immortalized by a painting by Edward Hopper and is now a poster child for local fundraising. This was made possible for those in charge of conserving the lighthouse to raise funds to maintain the house. The picturesque Nauset Lighthouse is the iconic symbol of Cape Cod. Well, Cape Cod is now identified with the lighthouse. Just to mention the Nauset Lighthouse, and someone will take you to Cape Cod. And finally, we'll talk about Chatham Lighthouse. The history of Chatham Lighthouse. In its origin, Chatham Lighthouse was placed on Cape Cod's most southeastern location. The present lighthouse is one of 6 that were built in the area. This area entertained a great deal of maritime traffic. However, the waters of Cape Cod were brutal to many ships that graced its shores. The coastline of Cape Cod is rumored responsible for over 3,500 wrecks of vessels 1850 through 1980. Those who sailed close to Chatham shores tell tales of ghostly images that lured ships to what seemed like safety, only to have their hopes dashed against the rugged shore of the Cape. The building of a lighthouse was no cheap endeavor, nor was it easy considering the sand. In the early years, merchandise took months to reach American shores, and it took experienced sailors to bring it home. Not to mention ships were precious and costly to build. This lighthouse was built with the same solid construction ships were given. Chatham Light was built to save cargo and lives. In the old days, the lighthouse was the only means of preventing ships from running aground. The beacon emitted light like a giant flashlight, preventing ships from hitting the sharp rocks of the coast. The Chatham Lighthouse, also known as Twin Lights prior to 1923, is one of 16 remaining lighthouses on Cape Cod coast. The story of Chatham Lighthouse is more fascinating today as the world looks back over its history. Thanks to the preservation of this guiding light, visitors can visit this historic landmark. The original structures, built in 1808, consisted of 2 towers that were replaced in 1841. These once formerly wooden structures were resurrected in stone at the cost of $6,750. The Chatham Lighthouse was only one of the 1,500 structures built in the United States. Now there are around 700 left, and many are open for touring. In 1993, the clockwork was motorized, and the Coast Guard began management of the facility. Throughout World War II, Chatham remained operational, although Chatham Lighthouse sits on the coast more than 600 miles. Sits on a coast of more than 600 miles. Its primary reach is 64 miles of water encompassed by 3 sides of the shoreline. Nantucket Sound, located to the south, Pleasant Bay to the north. This is why the area is described as the Elbow. Those visiting the lighthouse will be privileged to a gorgeous view. However, looks are deceiving, considering thousands of wrecks that have taken place on this highly attractive coastline. The 48-foot-tall lighthouse faced a problem of water erosion within 30 feet of shoreline disappearing yearly. This guiding light is a formidable structure that sits 80 feet above sea level and was placed 200 feet from the bluff in its present position in 1877. The building that stood in 1848 sat further east of the lighthouse, the present lighthouse site. In the building, fuel was stored on what was described as an oil deck supporting the supply of fuel necessary for keeping the light on. The lighthouse represented land for sea-weary sailors, a landmark and a warning of danger. As the landscape eroded, placing the tower 26 feet from the edge of the bluff, the tower was in real danger. Within a year, the distance from the shore shrank to 26 inches, and the building started to slide into the ocean a couple months later. A little over a year later, the building constructed in 1841 fell. The very first building was constructed in 1806. However, the community wanted to create a visible difference from other lighthouse structures within the vicinity. So they added another building in 1808, placing the second wood structure 70 feet from the old structure. The idea of making these buildings movable created a safer access way for ships once the pallets these guiding lights out on were portable. In addition to building these portable lights, a one-bedroom dwelling, 17 by 26 feet, was designed for keepers. The light for the tower was fueled with lard and in a lamp fastened by a chain. Through this process, although this process lasted for years, Chatham Lighthouse was brought up to date in 1982. Further updating took place in August 1993 when the former Fresnel lens, which signature was it flashed 4 times every 30 seconds, was replaced by the new DCB 224 Aero beacons. Aero beacons entered the scene as lantern beams that would take Chatham Lighthouse into the future. Students, history lovers, and travelers can benefit when visiting this local historical landmark. People can let their minds roam into the past while contemplating the conversations that might have taken place back in its history about this wonderful piece of history. If visitors want to take in the area, there are plenty of bed and breakfast for hire. The original plan was to construct the lighthouse platforms from stone, but as the builder soon was to learn, James had the location of the first 2 lighthouses was void of stone. Therefore, wood was the final option. Yet, Chatham Lighthouse still shines around the clock even today. Over time, responsibility for the light has changed hands. In 1923, the decision was made to separate the twin beams. Since more up-to-date lighting rotates, the need for 2 towers became obsolete. When thinking of a lighthouse, try to imagine standing on the deck of a ship out in the ocean in a storm, searching for that beacon that might seem hard to fathom. Nonetheless, this was a way of life for many and still creates a livelihood today. Modern mariners have an abundance of technical gadgets to help them find safe passage and the mechanism that assists them in measuring the depth beneath the seas. Still knowing that the lights of home stand strong, well, it has to be comforting. Now, pieces of the past are affixed to the Chatham Lighthouse property, the North Tower, a museum, and a Coast Guard search and rescue. A listing of the keepers and assistants from the past to present were listed below. Of all the people listed, the charismatic George F. Woodman was a favorite. The towers and the people who cared for them were not always harmonious. The keepers and the weather could be tumultuous. Complaints loomed related to the construction and the upkeep of the property. When Keeper Stinson was a keeper, he was terminated, yet he made addition to the government property and was refused compensation. The towers replaced in 1841 by Winslow Lewis at a cost of $6,000. However, Inside of 12 months, the nephew, Mr. Lewis, collected a report whereas Keeper Howes complained of shoddy construction. In another instance, a new president was elected and a keeper lost his job. So it is clear politics played part in the history of Chatham Lighthouse. The idea of the idea of light extending for miles is normal for people of today. People built these towers with no trucks dragging mounds of stone through sand on wagons, no computers to reach around the world to access the best minds on the planet. These structures have lasted day in and day out, withstanding one of the most powerful forces on Earth, the ocean.